Great to see everyone tonight, and tonight we are going to be looking at the book of Habakkuk, the 8th of the minor prophets, so we're excited about it. Tonight we have with us Shay and Brother Alston, and so let's begin as we examine some of the questions in the book of Habakkuk. Shay will be reading them, Alston will be reading some verses, and together we'll be trying to look at what this scripture says. So, anyway, go ahead, Sister Shay.
Who wrote the book of Habakkuk, and when was it written?
Okay, so who are we going to guess wrote the book of Habakkuk? Who would you go with, Shay?
Habakkuk.
Would you confer with that, Alston?
Yes.
Okay, Habakkuk. Yes, Habakkuk is not really pretty much not undoubtedly the author of the book of Habakkuk. When was Habakkuk written? Any guesses? Any thoughts?
600 to 700?
Yeah, probably like
Or 700 to 600?
Well, now you're covering a lot of territory, Shay. I mean, it's like sometime in the past when it
Yes.
generally covers it. But probably the last couple of 3 decades of Judah, the southern kingdom, and so that would have been something like 625 to 610, something in that range. So it's probably about the time that we have Habakkuk being written, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute or two. But anyway, okay, second question.
In the first verse of this book, Habakkuk is simply referred to as the prophet. Does this indicate that he was well known? What do you think?
So what do you think?
Honestly, he's a minor prophet, so that just made me think that maybe he wasn't that well known, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, minor prophet in the sense that 3 chapters versus, like, let's say some major prophets like Isaiah 66 chapters, Jeremiah 52 chapters, Ezekiel 48 chapters. Of course, Daniel's only 12 chapters. He's a major prophet. So,
And this is all that we have in here of it. I mean, he could have written more.
yes, well, the only thing that's inspired is this book. He probably was, I think, fairly well known. We don't really know that. But it's kind of interesting in that the book of Habakkuk is not like a lot of the other prophets, because all the interaction in Habakkuk is between Habakkuk and God, and which kind of is very interesting because some of the other prophets would write down their prophecy in the sense of telling someone else, but his, I guess, is kind of written in the sense of almost a letter to God. And so, that's kind of interesting. I think he probably was pretty well known, although we really don't know that for certain. But the interesting thing, again, is that he is primarily in this book communicating with God. And that's so different, it seems like, the other prophets. They would get a message from God, and they would say, "Thus saith the Lord."
Or talking to the kings. Or,
or whatever the case may be. But Habakkuk is really basically interaction with God, which makes it kind of fascinating that God included that in a part of his word for us to have. But it deals with some very, 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 very important issues. So interesting. That's just kind of, nothing kind of unusual to you that, you would think Alston, a prophet, would have something to say to us, but basically records what he says to God. It's kind of fascinating, isn't it? But that might actually be even more significant, what somebody says to God instead of what somebody says to us,
It gives you a better idea, when we speak to God, I think we should first off know how to speak to him, and
Yes.
maybe this would give us a good idea on how to speak to God.
And you're going to see that he's going to bring up some, I mean, it wasn't all like, like this great, deep theological discussion. It was, God, this does not seem fair. I mean, it's. It
was almost like, are you sure about this?
Yeah.
I kept waiting on him to say, where were you when I made the stars and the...
It's kind of funny. When we write theology, it's almost like we write to impress people. When we talk to God, sometimes it's, the groaning's too deep for words. It's like, this is the pain, this is the suffering. So, but anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. So, but it's a fascinating book. Okay, third question, Sister Shay.
In the previous book, Nahum focused on the destruction of Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. What empire does the prophet Habakkuk focus on? What does 1 verse 6 say?
Okay, so Nahum focuses on Nineveh, which is the capital of Assyria, and the destruction there. And the next prophet, Habakkuk, he has a little different focus. So if you would, Austin, read chapter 1, verse 6, and let's see what empire Habakkuk is focused on.
Okay, for behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, the fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs.
Okay, the Chaldeans. So
Chaldeans? Oh, I butchered that word. Okay.
Well, actually, you sounded pretty close, so don't worry about it. The Chaldeans. And this is not really, but the Chaldeans is another word for what empire?
Babylonian.
Babylonian, very good.
Golden star.
Gold star time. Okay. So Nahum deals with the Assyrians, to Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. And then Habakkuk is dealing with the Babylonian Empire. And so let's just kind of jump into this now. We kind of got some of the formalities out of the way. But let's look at the fourth question, because this is the big one.
In Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, what is Habakkuk's complaint? Who is he presenting this complaint to?
Now, it's interesting that one of the big things before Austin read this is that Habakkuk comes with two complaints. So let's read 2 through 4. This is his first complaint.
Okay. How long, O Lord, will I call for help, and you will not hear? I cry unto you violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity, and cause me to look on wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists, and contention arises. Therefore the law is ignored, and justice is never upheld, for the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore justice comes out perverted.
So Habakkuk is presenting this complaint. How long, O Lord, do I call for help? And you don't hear, okay? Kind of one of the themes of this book is we cry out to God and God doesn't hear. Look, why do you make me see iniquity? And so, remember, he's prophesying in the last couple of decades of the southern kingdom, Judah. So he's looking around at Judah, the southern kingdom, Jerusalem, and what does he see? He sees violence. He sees
Iniquity?
Perverted justice.
What?
Perverted justice.
Perverted justice.
Sounds familiar.
Strife?
And so he said, God, nobody's paying attention to your law. Nobody's following your rules. Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of feel like you look at America today, this could be, the violence, the wickedness.
Everything we read in here, it seems like we're always saying that.
Yeah.
It sounds familiar. It's horrible that it's familiar.
And so this is his complaint. So what is he kind of complaining? And who is he complaining to exactly?
He's complaining to God, like, are you seeing all this that's going on?
Yeah.
Are you paying attention?
About this?
So if you looked in the in America today, could you say, God, you see what's going on? How about even in the church?
I wouldn't even want to ask him, does he see what's going on? I might not want the answer to that question. But
and so, he's saying this to God. So this is interesting. He begins out this complaint. So what does that kind of tell you about Habakkuk? Is he himself kind of, there's none righteous, no, not one. But is he concerned about righteousness?
Yes. I mean, he at least knows the law.
Yeah. Are you concerned about righteousness?
I think I am.
Yeah,
Maybe
how
I'm
about you?
not.
yeah.
Are you concerned about the fact, well, I'm not throwing about the spot. I'm concerned about my own unrighteousness. I'm concerned about, and it bothers me. And it's like, I don't know, and I realize everybody's not like me, but like, dude, shouldn't we obey the rules, kind of?
Mm-hmm.
God establishes these certain rules, and we should obey them. And, it just doesn't seem, kind of like right.
But it seems like the exception rather than the rule to want to do what's right.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And, I'm not saying, the Bible clearly makes it clear there is none righteous, no, not one. And so he's really concerned about what I would call, the total depravity of the culture he lives in, total depravity of man. And so he's really kind of bothered by this, and he's presenting this complaint to God. And so how does God respond to him? Read the fifth question.
In Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 5 through 11, how does God say he will judge Judah? Were the Chaldeans, Babylonians, a wicked people? And why would God use such a wicked people to judge his chosen people?
Okay, why don't you read 5 through 11 there, Austin, and
Okay.
we'll talk about these.
Look among the nations, observe, be astonished.
Now, this is God speaking here.
Okay.
So, right.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Why is it not in red?
Okay, because this Bible doesn't do that.
Okay. All right. All right. Simple enough. Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days. You would not believe if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. All of them come for violence. Their horde of faces move forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings and rulers and laugh matter to them, and are a laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap up rubble to capture it. They will sweep through like the wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty. They whose strength is their God.
Okay, so the complaint is, God, you got to do something. And what does God say?
I am.
Oh, I'm doing something. And so it's fascinating. What he said is, I'm going to bring these really, really, really bad people. And they're going to come, and they're going to overtake you. And so, do you think Habakkuk had known that from the beginning? He might have kind of rephrased his complaint. Okay.
I don't think it would have changed anything.
No. It's
No, because it says right there in 5, you would not believe even if you were told.
yeah. And so he has this complaint. God, look how wicked. You got to do something. Oh, I'm going to do something, all right. And he tells him what he's doing. And exactly what's happened. We know from history. The Babylonians came. They basically
So he sends wicked people.
Yes.
Biden administration.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of think of this though for just a second. Okay. Why would God use wicked people to judge his chosen people? I mean, Israel is his chosen people, obviously. Now, Habakkuk has already said in these first 4 verses all the things.
There's some deeper meaning to it, but I can't think of it.
I don't know that there is a really deep meaning to this. It's like, God brings judgment. God is just, but think of this.
Well, it wouldn't be a far stretch to encourage the Chaldeans to be just brutal the way they were taken over. Mm-hmm. Like if he had tried, not that he can't, I mean, I know God can do anything, but it seems like it would not be, easier is not the word I'm trying to say, but I don't know what word it is. If he used not wicked people, it would almost be like against their,
Yeah, okay.
it would be harder for them.
What not wicked people is he going to use?
Like not the Chaldeans, like another nation. He could have used another nation to judge Judah.
Would that nation have not been wicked also?
Well, I mean, all nations are wicked.
Right.
But these were already known for being
Yeah.
warrior, rough, ruthless.
Right. And it almost seems to me as if Habakkuk wants justice, but he wants to pick out the
Right.
person that brings the justice.
Like tender justice.
Yes. Like, Lord, help me to be humble. What if God uses your worst enemy to humiliate you?
Mm-hmm. I feel like I've been there.
Yes. And almost a Pretorius situation. And we don't get to pick the instrument of God's judgment or God's chastisement in our life. And we would like to be able to do that. But it's like, okay, whoa. But God does use this very wicked people. Read 111 again. Let's look at this a little deeper. Austin, if you would.
Then they will
Well, actually, let Shay read the question, then read 111.
Okay.
Read Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 11. Would the Babylonians be held guilty because of the way they treated Judah? So if God uses an evil nation or person as an instrument of judgment, will they still be held accountable?
Okay. Now, God's using the Babylonians, but let's see what God says about them in verse 11 again.
Okay. Then they will sweep through like the wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty, those whose strength is their God.
So would the Babylonians be responsible for their actions?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's not like,
What does it mean by it saying like the wind and pass on, but they will be like they're going to get away with it right now?
yes,
Okay.
yes, that's exactly what it means. They'll get their come up in 70 years later.
Okay.
And it's kind of like, out in California, the Nordstrom smash and grab crowd. They might get away with it for a short time.
Yeah.
But judgment is always coming. Yeah, they will get theirs. It'll come about 536 when the Persians come in, or 538 when the Persians come in and destroy them. So yes, they are going to get, and so everyone is held accountable. And so even if God allows a wicked nation or a wicked person to prosper, will that nation or will that person ultimately be held accountable? Can you
Yes.
get away with anything with God?
No. Some things are, the repercussions are instant. Some aren't.
Yeah.
I think that's the main difference, and I think people take later on repercussions the wrong way, as in they got away with something, but one way or another, you're going to have the punishment, the repercussions.
Okay, very good. Let's go to the seventh question. Would you read that, Sister Shay?
How are we to understand Habakkuk 1:13?
Okay. Here, let's look at this. Look at read verse 13, if you would.
Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal with treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallows up?
Okay, this is a condensed version. Swallow up those more righteous than they. This is a condensed version, but this is the second complaint. Remember, the first complaint was, look how wicked we are. What's the second complaint?
How can you let these people destroy us?
Yeah, the second complaint is basically why the Babylonians.
And that one right there is kind of, I mean, I guess it's all rude when you question anything with God or ask him, but that one's kind of like, I mean, thought you couldn't look upon evil. Why are you letting this happen?
Yeah.
Thought this. I mean, kind of second guessing what you say about yourself here.
Yeah, but think of, have we ever perhaps, maybe not on the scale, obviously, have we ever perhaps done the same thing? Look, everybody's messing up. And all of a sudden, boom, like, for example, if we look at America, can you see what's taking with the church, the world, everything else? And then judgment comes. God, why did you let this happen? I was talking about these bad guys. I wasn't talking about me, and I get carried away with this judgment. So
I can totally see that if I were talking to God today about it, he would say, I'm working on it. Just hold your horses.
yeah.
Like what he said up in the beginning.
And so how do we understand verse 13 when Habakkuk comes to this complaint? Why are you using the wicked to swallow up those more righteous than they? And what did he say about them in the first three verses, or 2 through 4? How bad things were.
Yes,
And
and
now compared to some of these other people, we don't look so bad.
Let me ask you this, and all joke. I'm not trying to make any political jokes here, and nothing about the Biden administration here. But when you go back and it talks about, like in 6, from behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, and that's who's going to place. I mean, can we relate that any to politicians?
Well,
in a way,
maybe not. Maybe let's think of countries more than the particular politicians. Was it Mark Twain that said we should always honor our country, but governments may be another story. Now, the Bible will say, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and to pray for those in authority and things of that nature. So nevertheless, we can we, yes, I think there is that.
I mean, because in this sense, it's kind of more of a literal barbaric sense, and then with today, it's kind of like you're having the same outcome here. It's just done in a more civilized, more discreet way. I mean, it's a ruining of a nation.
So let me ask you this question. So then, if God were to use the Russians or the Chinese to judge America,
Right.
and they may not be, there's as many Christians in those areas, there may not be, we may look at them as in some sense more wicked. That could be debated, I guess. But, can God bring that kind of judgment and use a more evil nation to judge the wickedness in a nation that seemed more quote unquote righteous?
Of course.
Yeah. And so I think there's some definite parallels. And what I think the other thing that he's saying is this. He's speaking of, let's go back to that concept of total depravity. That you leave a nation alone and it will indeed deteriorate. In other words, given enough time, energy, and effort, we'll all become Babylon. Because we
that's man trying to govern itself.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that usually doesn't work out real well in the long run. I think one of the problems is anybody that kind of does not understand the depravity and the sinfulness and the wickedness of man, that man needs help, I think they're almost doomed for disaster. And I think this is the point, that you leave a nation alone, and Babylon is what will become in the long run, or maybe even Assyria. Maybe you can go, a level worse. You say, "Oh, I'd never be like that. I would never do that." I mean, you say, look, in our time, well, look at Adolf Hitler. I'd never do that. Well, if you had the power,
never say never.
Yeah, if you had the power to bring a harm on someone you didn't like Adolf Hitler, probably not right away, but yeah, I would suspect,
After you keep getting away with it over and over and over
Yeah.
and get a following, yeah.
Yeah, you could see that. So, perhaps, the fact we haven't committed that sin is the lack of a good temptation. Or maybe we don't have the power.
Opportunity.
Yeah, opportunity, yeah, or
Yeah,
power to
the
do
only
so.
thing that stands between me and a sin is the opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. So Habakkuk's like, okay, second time, God, how you let us get away with this? Second time, God, why are you using these people to judge us? So anyway, let's jump to the next question, Shay.
Habakkuk 2:4 states that the righteous will live by faith. Where is this passage quoted in the New Testament? What does it mean when it's used in Romans 1:17 and Galatians 3:11?
Well, let's turn there. Why don't you turn to Romans 1:17, Shay, and then let Austin turn to Galatians 3:11. With this statement, the righteous will live by faith. And it's also quoted in the book of Hebrews as well. This quoted basically 4 times in the Bible. Habakkuk 2:4, Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11, and then again in the book of Hebrews. So why don't you read Romans 1:17, and then Austin will read Galatians 3:11. So you got 1:17, Shay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith.
Okay. The righteous man shall live by faith. And Habakkuk 2:4, that's really quoting that, where it says, but the righteous will live by his faith. Okay? So, what does it mean? The righteous will live by his faith.
Is it?
Well, read your passage.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about it.
Now that no one is justified by the law before God is evident, for the righteous man shall live by faith.
Okay.
That we can't live
Without.
and be righteous because we can't keep the law. We have to believe in Jesus to have any measure of imputed righteousness.
Yes. And we know there's a theological context. But in the Habakkuk passage, God is telling Habakkuk, you just got to trust me. And the righteous will live by faith. Now, when you come to the New Testament, like you said, the passage we read in Romans 1 and then in Galatians 3, it is that we can't work our way to God, but faith, belief is the basis of our righteousness, and like you said, imputed righteousness. It's real simple in kind of Habakkuk's time, because the Babylonians, you got to trust me that I know what I'm doing, okay? And basically, that's the base of imputed righteousness. Trust God, believe him, and he imputes that righteousness to us.
I think it would be harder for Habakkuk, though. Like, we get to look retrospectively because Jesus has already gone to the cross.
Mhm.
Habakkuk didn't have that perspective.
No, and Habakkuk is really kind of struggling. You know, the whole concept is, what do I do when God doesn't hear me? And the answer is, the righteous will live by faith. And do you ever feel like there's no basis for your faith? Like you're not getting an answer?
I'm sure that I do. But I feel like it's just my impatience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would no basis to your faith and not feel like you're getting an answer. I feel like that's two different things
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if I'd.
Okay, maybe that's not the right, because there's a basis, but do you ever feel like you're not getting an answer?
Yeah, of course. That's that's everyone goes through that.
Okay. And so how do you handle that?
I just have to kind of. You just got to talk to yourself. You know, when you don't get an answer from God, you just gotta go back and read these scriptures that's in the Bible of every time every man has screamed and shouted to God and didn't get an answer, and you see eventually in that book, would you just hold on?
Yeah.
Would you, were you there when I hung the stars? You know,
Yep. Job's a good answer.
And I think that's one thing that we got to do. Anytime that we feel like we're not getting answers, kind of like, okay. All right, fine. All right, I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna keep on praying about this, but I'm not gonna get angry with you.
There you go.
So, I think that's what I try to do.
And
at
I
least.
even try to think in my own life. Like, I'll look back on situations where I was anxious about some resolution or about an answer or something, and to how those things have played out.
I think that's a really good thing,
Yeah.
is to go back from
And
previous
count.
prayers.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's kind of
The
one,
remembering stones. Remember when we talked about
Yes.
like it reminds me
And
of
I
that.
think that's one good thing important thing about having a good relationship with God is when you develop that relationship with Christ, is you start to understand. I don't want to say God is predictable, because I don't want to take away, his mightiness, but you can have a better sense of how God operates, and
Yes.
you can be content with no answer or an answer, or
Well-
either way, that your God is listening.
yes. Well, let's don't put words in God's mouth. Let's take God's words, which are very
Yes.
true, where he says that in him there is no variable or shadow of turning. In other words, what theologians call the immutability of God. God does not change. So if God gives us a principle about which he operates, we can trust that he's going to do that and continue to do that. So, and remember, this whole prophecy, the prophet Habakkuk, he's talking with God. This is not communicating to Israel. So I think it's fascinating that God even had this book written for us, because it's really this is a book that you could really spend a lot of study and preach a lot of, I think, interesting sermons on. I really do think you could do
This is like Habakkuk's diary, but it's got God's answers in it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, last question. Let's read number 9, if you would, Shay.
In the last 3 verses of the book of Habakkuk, what does the prophet say he will do when he cannot understand God? Can God be trusted to make things right? Is it hard to trust God when we cannot understand what he is doing? And how does Satan try to use this to his advantage?
Okay, a lot of questions there. But let's read the last 3 questions, 17 and following. Go ahead and read, if you would. And this is in chapter 3, last 3 verses, 17, 18, 19 of Habakkuk 3.
Of chapter 3. Make sure I'm there. Okay. Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, the fields produce no food, Though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and He has my feet like hinds' feet, and makes me walk through the high places. For the choir director of my stringed instrument.
If this was that last phrase, this was actually kind of, you know, a psalm. This whole book, I mean, it was very real, but the stringed instruments it was put to music. 17 is fascinating. Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, and the yield of the olives should fail. Why did he use those three? That is fascinating. That just grabs you. Because all three of those are the three trees. Well, a vine is not a tree. We'll just use the term tree loosely here. The three trees that represent the nation of Israel. Mm-hmm. The fig tree, the olive tree, and the vine. They represent Israel. And what he's saying there is pretty incredible. What he's saying is, though it may seem I'm finished with Israel, I am not. It's really just quite amazing. So what does the prophet say he will do when he cannot understand God?
Praise him anyway.
Yeah. Exalt in the Lord, and rejoice in my salvation. God of my salvation. Lord is my strength. Make my feet like swines' feet. Okay, so he said, I'm going to trust you anyway. You know, I could go back to a story of a man that I led to the Lord who was in the hospital. And he said, I'm going to pray, Lord, that you'll send somebody to me so I can get saved. An incredible prayer. And he said, if you don't answer, I'm just going to keep on praying. I like that. That's pretty neat stuff. Can God be trusted to make things right?
I kind of feel like that's a stupid question.
You know, it really is a stupid question. It's also a reversal question.
Because everything God does is right.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The danger of that question is it puts me judging God.
Yeah.
Can God be trusted to make things right? Well, I guess in some sense we have to, but remember the thing that Satan always tries to do is he tries to get us to question God.
Yeah, that's doubt.
Yep.
That's the biggest tool.
Yes.
Well, I won't say the biggest tool, but it's a major one.
Well, let's look at this other question. Is it hard to trust God when we cannot understand what he's doing?
Of course.
Yeah.
But that's because of our own fault. It's
Sorry,
not because
that's our
God's not
human-
trustable. It's
Yeah.
because we lack the ability to see
The
it through.
intellectualness of that goes back to my ways are higher than your ways, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts mindset. But
So how does Satan try to use this to his advantage?
doubt. Yeah, it
Back
causes
to that question. Can God be trusted to make things right?
It's like he's saying, did he really say he's going to make it right?
If you question out of everything God is, and in this Bible, if you question one thing, if one thing becomes questionable, then it makes everything else false.
Now
if you think that way.
Yes, it does. Now let's go back and say this. God proves himself and shows his faithfulness. So it's not like the Bible is just simply this, like, a leap of faith is not a leap in the dark. I mean, because like we talked, for example, we've seen God work in the past, or what I would call the bank of faith. You know, how did David know he could fight Goliath? There's something going on there. He knew he could fight Goliath, and he said, my God, who delivered me from the paw of the bear and the paw of the lion, will deliver me from this uncircumcised Philistine. What he's basically saying was, you know,
He's done it before.
by God's grace, I killed a bear and a lion. And you can't be that much worse than a bear and a lion. So, you know, and, you know, so we have seen God work. So there has to be this, like, phrase I would describe, this bank of faith, where we have made deposits of faith in and we've seen God work, and then we can pull it out. Because if you've never trusted God in the past, just like my friend over in Screven County, the mechanic who was a good mechanic but had dyslexia, couldn't read and stuff, And, when he came to know the Lord, he said, I'm going to read the Bible. I said, Mike, that might not be the first book to start out with is the Bible. And so he starts reading Genesis, and he said, I was pretty good with the these and the its and the and. And I said, well, Mike, everybody's pretty good with those. That's not. So he said, so for every word down there that I couldn't say, I said a word. And he said, and I made it through the book of Genesis, and I was going, dear goodness. I was going to my mind, you're reading the genealogies and all these names and stuff, and dear goodness. And then he said, and I got over into the end of Genesis and got into Exodus. At the time I got to Exodus, he said, I was actually reading. And he said, I learned to read by reading the Bible. That's a great primer to start out with, the genealogies in Genesis 4. He saw that and he said, wow, God taught me to read. And then, you see what God has done in your life. And then you does it make it easier to trust God when you've already seen God?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, anyway, pretty neat. Any other thoughts on the book of Habakkuk? It's an incredible book, and again, what do we do when God is silent? Keep trusting Him and keep praying. I guess that's about all we can do and stuff. So, all right. Any other thoughts, guys? Okay, our time's about up. So, hey, great tonight. I want to encourage everybody, read the Bible. God bless and have a great evening.